This is the Delta Huddle Podcast. Hello, I'm Stefan Stenners, and welcome to the Delta Huddle Podcast. Today's episode is really special for a lot of reasons, mainly because it delves not only into the heart of user testing and what drives it forward, but also its history and where it came from. What we think of today as a traditional beta test or a standard user test didn't start out that way. It took years of trial and error and learning about what makes testing great to get to where we are today with Delta testing. Joining Centercode's VP of Marketing, Chris Rader, to discuss the past, present, and future of user testing is Sharon Rylander, Senior Director of UX Research and Strategy at Square Panda, and Mario Sancho, Chief Delivery Officer at Centercode. Sharon's many accolades and accomplishments include winning a technical Emmy for her work at Sling, collaborating with Pixar animators to bring miniature robots to life, and showing state-of-the-art VR technology to the late Stephen Hawking. In the past 15 years, she's worked exclusively with startups to help build out teams for UX, beta testing, customer support, and more, regularly intersecting with the fields of analytics, marketing, and PR. Her current role at Square Panda focuses on foundational literacy games for young children. And with nearly 20 years of experience under his belt at Centercode, Mario brings a wealth of experience and expertise as the Chief Delivery Officer. His extensive background in beta test management, including roles in support, training, and sales, has been instrumental in ensuring that Centercode's customers continue to receive the maximum value from all of our services. This episode was a joy to make, and the insights shared by Chris, Sharon, and Mario were absolutely invaluable. There's decades of wisdom to be found in this episode, and I hope you enjoy.
And I understand you guys have a pretty extensive background. So Sharon, first, I'd love to hear how you met Mario.
Yeah, so I worked at the time at a company much like Centercode, except we predated you guys, called Betasphere. And we were in a massive time of growth, trying to hire as many program managers as possible. We were basically doing outsourced beta program management. We didn't have a SaaS model yet, so it was strictly just the services. And Mario's resume came across our desk, and it was shy on some of our required skills, but I was the person doing the phone screens. It just barely passed. And so, and he lived in SoCal. And so I felt the weight of this decision about whether or not to even fly him up for an interview because on paper, he looked kind of weak, but I talked to him and, there was something there, and I took a chance and we brought him up, and he ended up being one of our best employees. It was really amazing.
Well, Sharon, very kind there, actually.
I won't talk about all the grief I gave you after.
Met through paper.
Yeah, the other side of that coin, and the reality is she absolutely took a chance on me. Anybody that's worked with me over the years with beta, if you don't like me, she's the one to blame. So if you like me, she's the one to blame as well.
There we go.
But at the end of the day, I was actually just out of the military at that point. I was in the Navy as a reactor operator, been out, I believe, a year or two. And I was working as a field engineer for a company called ADT at the time, doing testing of installation of their equipment, all their electronic particle surveillance. Everybody at that point was doing the .com thing. So all my friends were going to .coms, they were going, and I wasn't necessarily interested in going into tech, at least in the startup world. But I had an interesting experience at the time where I had done really well with the company I was at, got to my first review with the company, and I was supposed to have been qualified in like 6 of their systems by that time, and they had a total of like 12. I had qualified and was certified and was being built out on all 12 of their systems as a field engineer. So I thought I was just going I'm going to get promoted. I'm going to the next step. And my manager said, "You're doing a great job, and I see no reason why you won't be promoted in the next 3 to 5 years." So that was when I said, yeah, I want to do something different that my effort can have much closer results. So let's go look at this tech and startup world thing. So being at that point, mostly military background and one maybe 2 years of field engineer work, I started to put my resume out there, and I got lucky enough to talk to Sharon at the time, and it was actually very straightforward. I'm like, well, why do you think you can do this job? And I'm like, well, because I believe in myself, and I'm going to work harder, and I will, if I don't know it, I'll learn it. And I still remember her answer to this day. It's like, I believe you.
That's funny. Yeah, it sounds like me. Yeah, you were.
I believe you. And I came in, met the team, and from there, you say that the rest is history. And I got a job as what Essence today we would call a beta manager.
Yeah. And Sharon, you mentioned it was a time of growth and looking for someone to fill the seat, and specifically the beta program manager. What was going on that growth was, or explain the growth if you could.
Yeah, it was 2000, 1999, 2000 era. Remember that era? Yeah. When everything was exploding and there were just not enough bodies. Like, literally you could go into Fry's and see somebody who was homeless last week, running the aisles looking for stuff for you because there were just not enough bodies to go around to do jobs at that time. There was so much money flowing. And then, of course, 2001 hit and it all just cratered and, went 180 there. But the less flippant answer is that these two guys who started this company, Betasphere, they hit a nerve, and I give them so much credit. They ran a beta program. It was successful. They made a little money. They did another one. They kept growing. For the first 16 quarters of their existence, they were growing and profitable on bootstrapped earnings. Not a dollar taken from anybody, which is almost unheard of here in the Valley, So it was impressive. And I think what they did, it's a niche area, right? But they hit a nerve. And I used to joke that we worked with everybody except Apple. But we were playing with all the large brands as well as startups and everybody in between. And so word got around and we were just growing rapidly.
Yeah. So what about tech do you think was interested in specifically, I guess the beta management or the beta testing aspect of it?
Sorry, what was the question?
So like tech was looking for the solution, right? So like what do you think was happening specifically with tech? Like why do they need users? Why do they need testers?
Yeah, no, I could tell you. So at least at that time, and it probably hasn't changed a ton, is that there was so much competition, right? That and so much money flowing around that companies could look at quality a bit more than sometimes they had in the past, and that became a competitive advantage. There's a lot of stuff going around where people would buy technology and then consumers would get burned, right? And so, especially if you've got a consumer, CE product, right? A consumer electronics where it's expensive. It's really, really expensive. And what happens in a ton of companies, and even to this day, is beta becomes this checkbox. And historically, that's kind of all it was. Is you had your engineering, and then you had your QA testing, and then you had this checkbox of beta, and it was always an afterthought. And by the time you got to that point in the product development process, everybody's burnout. They're just done, and they're ready to get it out. There's a ton of pressure to get the product out to market. And I know I'm not telling you anything that you don't see on a daily basis, right? There's just that pressure, and so it gets done poorly. And plus, it's tacked on to somebody's job description, generally the product manager, right? And so they're doing a whole bunch of other stuff, and now they have to do this beta program, which it turns out can be very time intensive. And so it fails. They do all these rookie mistakes, and it just doesn't. And then you don't get the benefit of what you could be getting. So these guys came along and actually said, you know what? Your beta participation rates, that was a big thing at the time, beta participation rates are maybe 30% on a good day. We're going to guarantee at least 70%. And they did. And they did it through having a good methodology that was outsourced, and basically took advantage of efficiencies across time. Because the other reality for a lot of companies is that they were only doing this checkbox maybe once every year or two, because Agile hadn't quite taken hold yet, so we didn't have that concept. So it was a longer term cycle, And so it didn't make sense for a company to hire a dedicated beta person unless you had a whole bunch of hardware products, and then they could, economy of scale, hire somebody. But that was more rare, right?
The other thing that I remember from that era, Sharon, was that the big portion of their value prop was what they would call the beta crunch, a resource crunch. Yep. And again, back to the era where you didn't have enough people to do anything. So this checkbox, whether it was a checkbox or not, or they tried to take it seriously, we actually still remember to this day the image where I was like, this is your release date, and this is the resources that you need coming up to your release date. Coming up, they're going to be really high. And those resources at the same time are trying to figure out how to launch a product, the pricing, distribution. Product managers are up to here with stuff to do, and you need to do this beta as one of the last steps along the way. So some would take it as a checkbox. I'm like, yeah, we did it. Give it to someone. And others would try to take it seriously and realize they don't have the resources for it. So that was the big value proposition at the time. If you want to get something out of beta, look at Betasphere, because we are your extended resources to get this service done in a quality manner and good high participation rates that you get something out of it.
Yeah, good take. How do you think that's, for both of you, how do you think that's changed now? I know that was obviously, 2000, there was the internet bubble, there was a lot of money. I don't think we're necessarily in that position right now in a lot of companies where money is very abundant. I do feel like there's still not enough resources, from what I'm seeing. There's still a few resources, but not as much money going around for that. So do you think that changes the idea or the concept of beta?
No, not at all. And in fact, with less money, there's it turns out an increased need, because you have even fewer people to get everything done. The thing that I've seen in my experience up close, 100%, once a company gets a taste of a well-run beta program, they never turn back. They have to have it. It becomes a mandatory part of the equation because they see the ROI. They get it. Until they experience it, oftentimes they don't get it, but that's what it takes. So especially when things get lean, they start relying even more heavily on, outsourced, tools and or services. So that's what I have seen. I think in terms of changes in the industry, I mean, there have definitely been a lot of changes, now that, everybody is doing some form of agile, or at least pretends to be. There's a lot more, iterative releases out there, and that lends itself to the idea of delta testing, which I know you guys have coined, which is great. I know like at Sling, we were basically doing that. We kind of organically, we just didn't know what to call it yet. So thank you. So and what I mean by that is, you could have a large scale beta program that is perfect for a new product going out to the market for the first time. But once you're iterating on an existing product, that changes the equation a little bit in terms of best practices. And also in terms of what you can get away with. You don't have to have so many people, et cetera. And so that's where Delta comes in, and where it's this ongoing process, and you're just constantly iterating. And it's just the next step after QA. Yeah.
The other part you've seen that I've experienced here in the change from then to now, beta itself is better understood. Back then, the problem with beta fundamentally is that beta is both a stage and it's a process. So when you would try to have that conversation, oh yeah, we do beta, and you'd always have to go, well, can you tell me about that? And they're like, well, yeah, it's being QA'd and it's in our products in beta right now. Well, who's testing? Well, our QA testers. So obviously, that's not how we would define beta. And I'm like, then you're not doing beta at all. So since then, that's now, you can have a conversation of that everybody's kind of coming from the same world when you're talking about beta. That it is truly a product that's out in the field, that your testers or proxy for the testers, nowadays we have dog fooding that would be potentially your customers, that it's out in the real world. Somebody is either testing it as either proxy for your testers or your testers and giving you feedback during a set period of time or over time, if you will. That's where you can have a common conversation with just about anyone in any field now with data, when it comes to beta. So I think that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen since then. And of course, the methodologies, the experience that people have, the different products and what they can get from it, the value extracted from it for different teams, whether it's the engineering, QA teams, the product teams, the UX, CX people, and even just straight marketing or promotion purposes are all kind of pulling from it today, much more than they ever were back in the 2000s, which was mostly a quality play back then.
Yes. Yeah. Almost like an extended QA. And I agree 100% that the intersections with other departments is pretty high. The value there is pretty high. I just want to go back really quickly though. So it sounds like, Mario, I know you talked to a lot of companies. Is the nomenclature getting more standardized? Because I know this is one thing that has always driven us crazy, right? The word beta, it gets used in so many different ways that it almost becomes useless. But it sounds like, are you experiencing a bit more standardization?
It is on the concept of beta, but as you're saying, well, we're now beyond beta. Centercode is beyond beta now. We're in a delta, which is more in line with agile. So if I want to have the starting conversation on betas, it's usually where I would do that. Well, we've worked in the past with beta test, and then in that scenario, I can have a very good quality conversation with clients that we're both talking about the same thing. It's the next level where we're now introducing Delta, this concept of continuous testing with your error releases, that it really starts to blow people's minds that you could do that. Like, well, yeah, the Delta can absolutely, it's well tied for that. A well-organized program can do that. Most of them are still thinking that even if they're in an agile format, that they're going to pick some version of the release, someone that has either the most critical features in it, and they'll periodically select a version of their agile process to go and beta test. So where the conversations now is like, you don't have to select which is the most critical one, but let's work in a process that you can test all your of releases, not just the ones that you think are going to have the biggest impact across the board.
Yep.
I would definitely love some more standardization in terms of the nomenclature. That would be super.
I know, right?
From a marketing perspective, we have to go after terms like beta testing and user acceptance testing and field testing and all these different variations of the test. So a lot of those terms are still used. It really much depends on the type of company, whether or not they're more engineering focused or more marketing and product focused or UX focused, and they like to change. Telecoms, different, like international companies call it different things. So kind of just there, Mario kind of pointed it out. There is something consistent across them, and it's not the name. It's the real people. It's the real products, and it's in their environment. So that kind of distinguishes whatever term they're using, saying like, okay, we can all kind of unite around that concept more than the name. Yeah.
It is tough, though. I think we should form a consortium and just solve this.
This is now the second time on the podcast I've been told that we need to have a consortium.
There we go. All right.
Yeah. It wasn't for that one specifically. It's almost talking about
be the founders.
Yeah, it was one of the setup protocols. We're talking about TVs. And I don't know if you've ever set up a TV and you have to log into like your Netflix or anything like that, and you got to this person says like, oh yeah, you can scan this one, or you got to log into this thing, or you have to go figure it out yourself and type in a keyboard to figure out your. So it's like, oh yeah, we got to get people together and do that. So yeah, we'll put it on the list of consortiums that we need to put together.
Okay, I'm down. Sign me up.
So one thing I really enjoyed. So I came from beta testing as well. Like I did beta testing at a company. We did not have a tool. We used a lot of different tools. So you mentioned something, Sharon, is like once you get hooked on a good beta, when I started in my career, I went straight into beta testing. I wasn't a beta tester. I was like a coordinator of beta. So I had an engineer above me, but I would just respond to all the feedback and get all that through. And then at one point in time, I was tasked with like trying to understand how the beta program was going overall. And I dug into it. I'm like, man, that engineer's doing it different on that product line, and this engineer's doing it different on that product line. And I couldn't get that answer out of anybody. What is a good beta test or a good beta program as a whole? And I couldn't get a good measurement to tell me what was good because everyone was doing it slightly different. Now, have you seen that? And you've been at a lot of companies So I feel like you have enough to share on this, but like, what's your version of a good beta? And when you come into a company, what does a beta program typically look like if it's not a good beta program?
So typically it's non-existent. That's been my experience, typically. And a good beta program is one where everybody finds value at the end of the day. I know it sounds kind of trite, but that's really what it boils down to. The engineers find value because it's a form of extended QA. The product people, for that same reason, like that, but they're also getting, if you manage the beta program well, you get advocates. So then PR is happy because they get quotes at lunch, which they don't normally get for real people, real customers, right? So they get hooked on the drug real fast. Similar in marketing, you're doing essentially market validation it's not true market validation. I don't want to, pretend that, but it is, there is a significant element to that is extremely helpful to the marketing department. So they love, it just goes down the line, right? Where, you can, if you do it well, you can predict a lot of stuff. The customer support organization, you're putting together, here are the likely call drivers, right? They love you because they don't have to wait and get their knees scraped. They can already have articles written in advance and, be ahead of the game. And same with even, going back to product development, they already know, they can tell what it's going to be the dot release. They can start working on it. So even if you go to market with some known issues, in advance, they're already working on the fixes. People complain, as everybody predicted. And then the next week you come out with the fix for it. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, they're so responsive. And so the whole company looks brilliant when really it was just this secret weapon of doing a well-run beta.
Yeah. So I don't want to call you a peddler at this point, but you come into a company and there's no beta program. How do you get them hooked? Are you like, you give them something to try?
It's hard. Well, yeah, it is tough. So, so here's the reality. If I get hired, that means there's at least one executive in the company who believes in the value of some form of user testing.
Huh.
And so I naturally have an ally. And then the rest of the company probably doesn't want me to be there.
Why?
Because they feel threatened.
Okay.
Because it's like, no, we write good code. Why and you're going to expose it. It's just everybody, you get paranoid because it's your baby. You've been working on it for a year or whatever, and it's scary. I get it. It's emotional. It's scary, right? And so that comes out in the way of, diminishing what it could be. Do we really need this? Oh, we don't have time anymore for it. What, those sorts of things, right?
Some resistance.
Yeah. It's just likes testing.
Yeah. It's past guidelines. So we're good to go. Marketing did its research. Of course, we developed the first product.
Yes.
Love it.
Yeah. The problem with that, though, is so much time passes from the market research until you build it that you don't know if it's relevant still, right? And so you got to, that's the kind of marketing tie-in.
But someone has the question, right? Someone has the question, is it?
Yeah.
It may not be that person who made it, but someone has that question.
Yes.
Right? Usually how you go about it, Chris, is just that. If somebody has the question, is identifying that person. Sharon talked about it, usually an executive. From my perspective, it's identifying the person that has doubt about everything that they've done. Whether we want to say a simple question like, what keeps you up at night? That's usually the way you get a beta program in to solve that first doubt that they have, to make sure that we can put them at ease one way or the other through a properly run beta test.
Oh, that's a great strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I normally I like my strategies. It's similar, like to go around and have one-on-ones with people. And I just have one-on-ones with everybody when I first started at a place and really get to know people, really get to understand where they're coming from, what their concerns are, what their beliefs are about user testing, whether it's UX testing or beta or whatever. And then kind of explain the process, and that my role is to make them look brilliant. And we're going to do that behind the scenes within the walls of this company. And even if the beta program, there's still like it feels like it's out there, but it's not really out there yet. It's not in the public eye yet. So there's still time to figure out how to respond to things that we may not have anticipated. So that's the first thing that I do when I go into a company is basically a sales job, just to kind of warm people up. And then there's still, people kind of nod their heads, and you can still see the doubt in their eyes. It's like, okay, I guess we're doing this, and then they get the result and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, they're the ones going to bat. Like, we definitely need to keep doing this. And it always takes care of itself. And it's been my experience every single company.
I have a good story. I won't tell it right now, but I have a good story for the opposite of someone who
really.
I want to ask you guys the question first. Someone who didn't have doubt, and it was proven that they need to run a test. There was no doubt in anybody's mind at the company that they needed to do this, and they threw a lot of money at it to solve the problem. They saw beta as, okay, that's going to solve this problem.
Okay.
My story has to do with products having to be returned, and the company had some pretty big problems, and they needed to solve this before right now. They need to solve it right now. So have you had that experience of someone that did not have doubt? They were certain they needed to do beta testing. Come fix this for us, make this better.
No, but I can imagine like that to me, like I immediately smell panic. And whenever there's panic at a company, things get weird. And so I would my response to that would be to diffuse the panic and work on that in parallel with it sounds like they probably would need a beta program, but I think that's almost secondary to whatever led up to that moment.
For me, that actually conjures something slightly different probably from what you're asking for. Is the person that wants to do a beta test, or the company wants to do a beta test, what I call the wrong reasons. And that reason is we're going to sell our product to these beta testers.
Yeah. It drives me crazy.
My head originally went, I'm like, okay, yes, their product is so awesome, and we're going to do a beta test because it is a way to increase sales.
Yeah.
And beta test will do that, but not you're using and you're abusing your testers in that moment for what they're there for, to help you. It's not to sell them something. It's to get their honest feedback to help you make a better product. So therefore, you can go sell it to other people and at a faster, higher rate than you would otherwise. So those are the ones. That's when you said that's where that went. We want to do a beta test.
What's funny is there's a lot of variations of what beta is solving for somebody. Like we talked about the checkbox. I just need to get this out the door. I need to do this. There's the company that someone there has a question in their mind of, I don't know if I really trust this. Can you help me make sure that I can trust it and get some, confidence boost? The one I was talking about was the one with the, oh crap moment. We launched something and we need to pull it back because we released with something real bad in the field.
Oh my gosh.
The one I'm talking about is a company shipped a product. The reviews were atrocious. It had a pretty big, manufacturing blunder when they produced the units, and they actually had pulled back the units. They had bad reviews. It cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in total to just bring back the units. They had to remanufacture the pieces of the broken unit, and they came back and they're, please, we need a beta program. Please, we need everything in place to check before this product goes out the door, because we can't spend that money again on another failed product release.
Yeah, that's an expensive lesson for sure. Oh, that's painful. That's painful.
It's interesting. Go ahead, Sharon, please.
No, it's when I started at Sling, we were just expanding internationally, and we had this was a hardware device that connected to both your TV and your internet, and it worked brilliantly in the U.S., going to Europe, and they literally were about to launch, and thank goodness did the beta because it turned out there is a network setting on home routers in Europe that has a value outside of the range for the US. And because we had coded for the US, nobody thought about it because nobody experienced it. All the tests were running fine, right? So it literally was going to launch in a way where nobody could use the product, where it would be 100% fail rate.
Ugh.
But and that's simplest thing to correct too, right? Like one line of code and you're done. But it luckily caught. So thank you, beta.
That's the war stories that most people don't get to hear. Like when I say the story of someone that released it and it went out, it's like, oh yeah, there's money attached to it. You can explain it, but here's what we saved the company from doing.
Yes.
Oh, that's what I used to call those when I was a beta manager. Was I called those the golden bugs?
Yeah,
it was something that was caught that you got to come and say, "Hey, stop production."
Yeah,
please stop.
Please stop. Hey, we found something. We're gonna fix this. It's gonna be great. It's just those were the best. To me, those were the best. I was always hoping as a beta manager to find the thing that just one individual item that came out of it that saved everything, saved the company millions of dollars, saved people jobs and careers in some cases because it did what it needed to do, which is double check our work prior to going out.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to do it without that, right? Like how double check. You probably didn't do a great enough check yourself, just being a developer or a product manager or QA person. Like assuming that you're going to cover everything is a little wild. Yeah.
All right, Chris, you might be one of the only other people on the planet that's got the depth of experience in both beta and UX research.
There's a few out there.
Are there? No, where are these people? Because
I know a couple. I've worked with them. That's the only reason I know.
No, because I've been in more recent years. I've actually been focused more on UX research, and when I interact with those folks, it's like beta is way over somewhere else. It's like zero interaction. Yeah. And I was even I was on this online, meetup type event with, I don't know, it was sizable, I don't know, 60 other people or something, all UX researchers, and asked the question, oh, so, who's integrating beta as part of the, or, overseeing it or knows about it or is in some way intersecting with beta? Chirp, 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 yeah. chirp, chirp, chirp. Finally, somebody goes, do you mean a longitudinal diary study?
An ethnographic study?
Yeah.
Yes, there's plenty of names for it.
And I was shocked.
Yeah.
And because to me, it's all under the same umbrella. So I'm curious to know, other people. This is great.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about user research. It's users, right? So it's beta testing. Yep. It's reaching out to those people. It was a natural connection to me because when I worked there, it was when I worked at Western Digital. I kind of started up in user research there. I picked up some books. I met with the UX manager, and I was hooked on it. The idea of psychology and thinking with users and all that stuff. And I was doing beta at the time, which was far more QA focused. So I think that's really the disconnect. Is it's a separation in when the product is developed and when it hits each of these teams. User research and UX is design. The product isn't really flushed out yet. It's a lot of prototype stage. It's some of that. And it's in a slightly different area of teams until Agile really came in and just like started blending everybody into one project group. But that's where I saw that connection. But user research should absolutely care about beta. And I the reason why I say it, I see it all the time, is because UX talk to the people that are running betas. So it's not always UX that are necessarily running them, but they have the survey experience, right? They know how to write a good survey. They know how to dig into a little bit of depth when they're talking to users and probe for some, good responses. And And give some context. That's actually how I met Sharon from, because I was doing user research. I kind of was dabbling it here at Centercode, and I worked with Sharon on a couple of projects, and we did some moderated in-lab studies. We brought some people in, and we tested out some products, and just a natural connection. She was already doing beta testing on those things, and it was great flavor to add to anything.
Yeah, I was like, what is this methodology? This is cool. And then I think at, let's see, we did that at Anki, I guess. I remember doing an out of box with you on that. That was great. That was very helpful.
Actually hired one of those participants. I don't know if you know that.
Did you?
Yes, she was Haley. Our beta bound community manager participated in those studies. Yes. So she brought in her younger brother to give feedback, and she was there because we met through beta bound, but she that doesn't make me feel younger, but yeah, we hired one of those participants. It's interesting when you think about a user researcher. They have a connection to design, right? That's their resource, right? They produce the designs.
Yes.
And engineers have QA, and QA's the same connection. So those two are separated. So it's like, that's why there's a somewhat of a rarity of what Sharon's seeing is in that connection between both of them. Yep. So it has to be a good environment for a UX person to say, hey, engineers, I ran into these things that are not really my camp, they're your camp. And then that starts people pointing fingers. And that's what I always felt in the tension of working with those teams early on. It's you're calling my baby ugly, and you're not even supposed to be working on my baby. Like, you work on yours and I'll work on mine. So it was always like, don't bring your bugs to my area, or don't bring your usability issues to mine.
Yeah. So that brings up a good point. And this is something I also really want to talk to you about. I feel like the way organizations are set up, where research is done in silos, is less than ideal for probably most companies. And I'm sure there are exceptions. But I've experienced, helping to build and being a part of a research group that funneled up into its own executive sponsor and included market research, user testing, and beta, all under the same roof. We were one team. Now, on a day-to-day basis, everybody's off working with their own teams face-to-face individually, but they're not reporting to that manager, which is kind of a, fox in the henhouse sort of situation, honestly, right? So it's a little bit less biased. And also, there's so much cross-collaboration at the end of the day when everybody's kind of back at their desk and going, oh, I'm doing this. And it's like, oh, you found that result. And I found this result. And you can actually get a clearer picture of truth. And the relevancy of that is, I've seen more than once the marketing department deliver one report and the product department deliver another report, whether it's from user testing or beta or whatever, and the information conflicts. And nobody knows this. Nobody sees this except the executive staff. And they are left with having to decide who's telling the better truth.
Yeah.
And they only have, 10 minutes to decide it. And so they make a decision, and it's just, that is the wrong way to go about it. If you have the research, what I saw is that when research conflicted, the actual researchers who were on the front lines, who actually had talked to the people who had been, buried in the numbers and did all the calculations, they can actually talk and figure out together what's truth and then have that reported up. That's harder to do when those people report to different managers, because then it gets territorial and personal. Versus when you're working on the same team, you're working towards a common goal, which is to find truth for the company so the company can make the best decisions possible. So this is something that is, I think about a lot. And I think companies will start to get smart and organize that way. I do hear of it a little bit, but not a lot. Do you see anything like that, Mario, in terms of... Yeah, probably not, right?
I haven't, no. I can't say that I have. I can't think of a single example.
Yeah. It's because what happens typically, right, is when companies start, they are siloed, right? Marketing's over here doing their thing, and products over here doing their thing, and that makes sense. But I see a real opportunity for companies that are a bit more forward thinking to structure things a little bit differently to take advantage. And again, it's not going to be relevant for all companies. I think, especially if you're a really large corporation, that you just may be too entrenched.
Do you see that single manager then reporting directly to the CEO, or like under what
Yeah,
more
ideally, yes,
a
because
chief research officer? Is that really what it comes down to? Is that what
yeah, either research or insights or whatever, right? Because you're also, I mean, the other reality is you're getting a lot of information from customer support or client success, whatever, if you're B2B or B2C, whatever. And also uh, sometimes PR, because if PR is running a community, then they are naturally getting suggestions. So having somebody who's responsible for all those touch points between what you build and the people who use what you build, and mining for information from all those touch points, like that is smart. And keeping that independent is even smarter. And so, yes, that does require somebody who is funneled up at the highest level to be that truth keeper.
Yeah, definitely comes with maturity, right, of organizations and those programs. Because, I mean, you talked about it earlier. Sometimes the responsibility of research or user research, market research, and beta testing actually falls to someone who's not, it's not their title, not their role. So we see a QA engineer just have to pick up and do a beta test and like, oh yeah, I'm close to the product. I know what's broken, or I know how to read this stuff, and they run testing. Or a product manager needs to go out the door and they just kind of get tasked, which is kind of, Luke's story of Centercode being tasked with running a beta when he had no idea what it was, or it's not his job responsibility. So if there's no one that's responsible for it and everyone kind of has to pick it up, it's hard to mature it because that person's probably done with it when they're done with it and that product's done. And now it's up to the next product manager, QA manager, support person to run it the next time they have to, get a product out the door or a new release or update. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing. Is just it really truly depends on the maturity. Once they break through, say product manager's like, man, that was a great beta. I got good results out of it, and they convince their boss like we should figure out some way to run a beta program for the company. Like someone get a resource, because we can't keep doing this like ourselves, or it's too cumbersome. What I see is a lot of times it's the tools that they have to use that makes it cumbersome, and the lack of experience and training and all that fun stuff. But yeah, so it's totally possible. I've seen those insights teams that are like huge, that have market research, user research, and every type of research you can imagine, and aspects of beta testing and all that fun stuff. But it's definitely slightly more rare because I think immaturity is far more prevalent in these companies now.
Yeah, interesting. Cool.
So one thing, I know we're going to get pretty close to time here. One thing I wanted to ask both of you was, what advice do you have to your younger selves coming into tech? This is the great standard question for everybody.
I hate this question.
Best question. Be hungry, be thirsty.
Oh, this one's pretty easy. I love this one. This question at the end of the day. So I'll kick it off and give you some idea, some time to think about it, Sharon. For me, tech is all about curiosity. Curiosity, the way the world works, the way things work. It's not I want to be in tech because I like playing video games or I like cameras. That's not what being in tech's about. Being in tech is about being curious. And if you're curious about how things work, it doesn't mean you have to be so curious and be the next Steve Jobs. Just curious enough. What are the settings on my camera? What can I do with this? And why would I use it? Maybe I never will. But what do these buttons do? And get a little dirty, get to find out like, ooh, that was a bad idea. Break things and then fix them again. If you're curious, you're going to do great in tech. That to me, it just comes down to that point.
So your advice to yourself would be curious.
Be curious.
I like it. Yeah,
that's great. I can't top that mic drop. I think that's.
Come on, Sharon, you'd have advice for yourself.
No.
Improv more.
Improv more. Yeah. Well, okay. It's a question for me specifically, or like
if you're getting into tech. And like you're like, oh man, don't do that, or you should really do that more. So you just stepped into the tech world, and you're there for some reason, in your current form, and you're able to talk to yourself. What advice are you gonna give yourself?
Well, I do think that most lay people who are not necessarily involved in the production of tech grossly underestimate what's required to make a tech product. Grossly under, so I think the corollary there is when you look around and you're like, why are we doing things this way? And like, why are we spending money on blah, blah, blah? Give some credit, some leeway to the people who've been there for a while and might have more experience with it. And ask questions, for sure, because it's important to understand, why things are happening. And honestly, no company is run perfectly. So sometimes it is the people coming in with truly fresh eyes who are able to see the inefficiencies and actually have some really good recommendations. But there's some give and take there, I think. I don't know. I think for myself, I mean, when I look back, like just career-wise, I think I've always been such a perfectionist and self-reliant. And so, this is outside of tech, right? That's just general where you have to be okay with asking for help and okay with focusing on the most important things as opposed to everything. So I've gotten better about those things over the years, but it took me a while. But that's any job anywhere, any industry.
Uh-huh.
For tech specifically, yeah, that's tough. I think
self-reliance about yourself, because that was my experience of all the years of working with you. It's always been your confidence in getting other people to open up and speak up and getting people to collaborate together. And frankly, like you said earlier, a safe environment to make them look good. So, but that would be, looking back and working with you, it was like, oh, Sharon's always amazing, getting the best out of everyone to create something amazing.
I had the same experience when I worked with Sharon. She gave me, I'm new at Centercode, and I've done, a handful of tests at Western Digital, like probably a dozen or so. She gave me a voice in her products line, and she stood behind me while I was talking to people I didn't know, that her company, telling them that here are some of the problems that we saw and things that worked, and she was there amplifying it. So she was, no, we need to fix that. That's a problem. And by all means, I was just handing results over and my opinions and what I've seen and observations of this new person that no one there has ever met. So I totally agree with that, Mario.
Well, thank you. No, you did good work. It was well deserved, both of you. So, but thank you. Go butter my temples now, fit my head through the door. So
I haven't done one of those in a while now.
Thank you for listening to the Delta Huddle podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Audible. And for more information about how to leverage Centercode for your next user test, head to centercode.com. We've got plenty of resources, ebooks, and more to help you get started. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon. Happy testing.